The snow was falling hard that night in the Montana wilderness, and somewhere deep in that frozen forest, a wounded ranger was fighting to stay alive. His breath shallow, his vision fading, he had only one chance left. His loyal dog, Rex. With a single whisper, Mike sent Rex running through the blizzard, miles of darkness, danger, and faith between him and survival. No one knew if the dog would make it, but sometimes miracles wear fur and four paws. As the storm raged, help arrived in the most unexpected way. Was it luck, instinct, or the quiet hand of God guiding every step through the snow? Some say it was fate, others believe it was faith itself moving through the night. If you believe that miracles still happen even in silence, even in storms, then stay till the end of this story. Comment your thoughts, share this video with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to keep faith and kindness alive. May God bless you for believing in the light. The wind that swept through Bitterroot Valley, Montana, carried the kind of cold that bit through wool and skin alike. It was early December, the sun just a dull coin behind a veil of clouds, and snow had begun to fall again after 3 days of sleet. The forest looked like it was holding its breath, pines draped in white, trails erased, silence stretching for miles, except for the distant groan of trees under the weight of ice. This was where Mike Harris, 38 years old, found himself driving his old government-issued pickup along a narrow logging road. Mike had the kind of face that told stories even when he didn't speak. Square jaw shadowed by dark stubble, a faint scar tracing from his temple to the corner of his mouth, and eyes the color of cold iron. He'd been a Marine once, years ago, stationed overseas in conflicts that had left him with both discipline and a quiet sorrow that never quite left his shoulders. After leaving the Corps, he'd bounced from one job to another before the Forest Service offered him a position as a temporary ranger in the Bitterroot National Forest. The last ranger, Peter Collins, had disappeared a week earlier. The report had said missing during patrol, but the locals whispered it wasn't that simple. In the passenger seat sat Rex, his 4-year-old German shepherd. The dog's sable coat gleamed even in the weak winter light, muscles tight and alert. Rex was a trained service dog from Mike's time in the Marines, a partner, not a pet. His eyes, a sharp amber, watched the world with focus that mirrored his master's. When Mike had nightmares, Rex was the one who woke him. When Mike said nothing for hours, Rex understood the silence. The truck rattled over the frozen ruts until Mike pulled up at the edge of a small clearing. A wooden sign half buried in snow read, "Raven Trailhead. Forest Service access only." He cut the engine, stepped out, and the cold hit him like a slap. Steam rose from Rex's breath as the dog leapt down, nose immediately to the ground. Mike adjusted the collar of his flannel jacket beneath his ranger's vest and checked the radio clipped to his chest. "Unit 21 checking in," he said, voice steady though his lips were numb. "Starting patrol along Raven Trail. Visibility moderate, snowfall light." Static answered him. The radio towers here were old, and signals vanished between the ridgelines. They started walking. The snow crunched beneath his boots, and Rex moved ahead, weaving through the underbrush, ears flicking. Mike's gaze swept the ground. The forest floor told stories for anyone who knew how to read it. After about a mile, he spotted the first anomaly, a freshly cut stump, its rings still pale and wet beneath a dusting of snow. A second stump lay 20 feet away, then another. He crouched, ran his glove along the cut surface, feeling the roughness left by a chainsaw. "Illegal logging," he muttered under his breath. It wasn't the first time he'd seen signs of it, but these cuts were recent, within a day or two. The tracks beside them were from an ATV, narrow tires, and a heavy rear axle. Someone was hauling lumber out after dark. Rex barked once, low and sharp. Mike turned to see the dog sniffing a pile of sawdust near a tire rut. "Good boy," he said softly. He took out his phone and snapped a few photos before opening his pack. Inside were small, motion-triggered cameras wrapped in camouflage casing. He fixed one to a tree facing the trail, adjusted the angle, and covered the base with pine needles. By late afternoon, the gray sky deepened into something heavier. Mike wiped the moisture off his beard with his sleeve and exhaled. His breath hung in the air. He remembered the regional supervisor's voice from earlier that week. A woman named Sarah Jenkins, mid-40s, efficient and calm even over the crackle of the phone line. She told him, "Don't push too deep yet. We're still investigating Collins's disappearance." Sarah was known among rangers as strict but fair. A tall woman with a lean frame and chestnut hair always tied back under a ranger's cap. Mike had met her once, years ago, during a wildfire response drill. She'd been the kind who gave orders with precision and never raised her voice. Thinking of her steadied him now. She represented the last thread of order in a forest that seemed increasingly lawless. As he moved deeper into the woods, the air grew stiller, almost listening. Another stump appeared, this one beside a patch of churned snow and boot prints. He knelt again, touching the impressions. The stride was long, likely a man, heavy boots, walking quickly downhill. The second set of prints was smaller, lighter, perhaps a teenager or a short adult. Whoever they were, they'd been here after the last snowfall. Mike looked up at the trees. "We're not alone out here," he whispered. Rex's ears perked. They pressed on until the trees thinned slightly, opening to a clearing half-ringed by fallen logs. Here the signs were obvious. Bark stripped, chainsaw marks, and scattered scraps of tarp. Whoever had done this wasn't just cutting firewood. They were operating an illegal mill. Mike felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He pulled out his GPS unit and marked the coordinates. Then he took out another camera, fixed it near the clearing, and aimed it at a spot where the trail narrowed. A choke point where vehicles would have to pass. He knew he couldn't confront anyone yet. One ranger alone against organized loggers was a losing game. But he could watch. He could collect proof. The wind picked up, hissing through the branches. Rex gave a low growl, staring into the line of trees to the north. Mike followed his gaze, but saw only the drifting snow. Still, something moved. A faint flicker of motion, too steady to be wind. A shape retreating. Mike froze, hand brushing the grip of the pistol holstered at his side. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though his pulse had started to climb. After a moment, the forest returned to silence. Whoever had been there was gone, or watching. As twilight fell, he finished his sweep and headed back toward the truck, retracing their steps by flashlight. The world had turned shades of blue and gray, the snow glowing faintly. Rex trotted close beside him, alert but calm. By the time they reached the vehicle, the first stars were beginning to pierce the clouds. Mike climbed in, wiped the fog from the windshield, and sat for a moment in the quiet. He could feel the weight of the forest pressing around him, the secrets under the snow, the missing man who'd worn this same badge before him. He turned to Rex. "We'll set more traps tomorrow," he said quietly. "If someone's cutting down this forest, we'll find them." Rex rested his head on Mike's thigh, tail thumping once. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless. covering the stumps and tire tracks as if the forest were trying to hide its own wounds. Mike started the engine, headlights slicing through the dark, and drove off toward the ranger station, unaware that someone far behind, in that same clearing, was watching the taillights fade through the trees. The forest looked different at night. What had been white and soft under the sun now turned blue-gray beneath the moon, and every sound, the rustle of branches, the creak of ice, seemed sharper, closer. Mike Harris crouched beneath a cluster of fir trees, his breath fogging in the cold air. 3 nights had passed since he'd first found the cut stumps, and now his patience had paid off. Through the scope of his binoculars, he could see the faint glow of lanterns deeper in the woods. Someone was working there, someone who wasn't supposed to. Rex lay beside him, silent and alert, his amber eyes reflecting the faint light. The German shepherd had learned the art of stillness from years beside his master. The only movement was the steady rhythm of his breath, visible in small puffs of mist. Mike reached down, touched Rex's flank briefly. "Stay," he whispered, and the dog froze like a statue. He slipped through the undergrowth, every step measured, until the smell of fuel and oil replaced the clean scent of snow. The clearing came into view, a makeshift lumber yard hidden beneath tarps and shadow. A pickup truck was parked near a stack of freshly cut logs, and a group of men stood beside a portable heater, their voices low and rough. Mike crouched behind a fallen trunk, lifted a small directional microphone from his bag, and pointed it toward them. The audio crackled softly in his earpiece. The first voice was deep, gravelly, and carried authority. "We move the next load tomorrow night. The Forest Service won't notice a damn thing." Mike recognized that voice from brief encounters in town. It belonged to Clyde Mason, a name that locals whispered but never said too loudly. Clyde was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered with a heavy beard streaked gray and eyes like cold steel. Once a logger himself, he'd turned ruthless when regulations tightened, organizing crews to cut and sell timber under the table. Rumor had it he'd spent time in jail for assault 20 years ago, after a bar fight left a man crippled. Another man laughed nervously. "You sure it's safe, Clyde? What about that ranger, Collins?" Clyde spat into the snow. "Collins got greedy. He was supposed to keep quiet, take his cut, and stay out of sight. Then he wanted double. Said he'd tell the feds if I didn't pay up." He paused, and the firelight caught the hard line of his jaw. "So I paid him in lead instead." Mike felt his stomach twist. Peter Collins, dead, not missing. Murdered. A third voice, higher pitched, broke the silence. "And what about the new guy? Harris, or whatever his name is?" Clyde's tone turned cold. "He's just passing through. We'll handle him if he starts snooping." Mike's pulse quickened, but he stayed still, adjusting the mic slightly to capture the conversation. Every word could be evidence. He glanced at Rex, who remained motionless, ears pricked. After several minutes, one of the men moved, toward the truck. Mike shifted his weight carefully, intending to reposition and capture their faces on the small camera fixed to his chest rig. He focused the lens, the red light blinking faintly, when the sharp chime of metal broke the night. Clink. The sound was small, but it might as well have been a gunshot. Rex had stepped on something, a line strung low between 2 trees, with small bells tied along its length, a tripwire alarm. The men reacted instantly. "What was that?" Clyde barked, spinning toward the sound. Flashlights flicked through the trees, slicing the dark. Mike cursed under his breath, grabbed Rex by the collar, and pulled him behind a log. His heart hammered against his ribs. Voices rose. One man fired a shot into the air. Snow cascaded from the branches above them. "Spread out! Someone's out there!" Clyde shouted. Mike knew they couldn't run straight back. Their footprints would give them away. He tugged Rex close and whispered, "Quiet, boy." Then he slipped deeper into the woods, using the terrain to his advantage. His time in the Marines had taught him how to vanish in the dark. They moved low and fast, weaving through the trees. Flashlights stabbed through the night behind them, voices echoing closer. Mike ducked behind a boulder, switched off the camera's light, and waited. His breath was shallow, controlled. He could hear Clyde shouting orders, the crunch of boots closing in. Then, from the distance, the rumble of another engine reached them. Mike frowned. A second vehicle, someone else arriving. He risked a glance over the rock's edge. A smaller figure had joined the group, wearing a heavy coat and carrying a notepad. "Who's that?" one of the men asked. The newcomer spoke sharply, voice female, tired but composed. "You idiots making this much noise will get us caught." Mike's eyes widened slightly. It was Rachel Dunn, a name he remembered from a news clipping years back. She was a logistics contractor, late 30s, compact build with dark hair cut short and practical. She had a reputation for working the gray areas, legal on paper, dirty in practice. Her face was pale in the lantern light, eyes restless but calculating. Rachel glared at Clyde. "If the feds find this site, I'm done. You said the ranger problem was handled." Clyde growled, "It is, and it'll stay that way." Mike recorded every word, his fingers trembling slightly from the cold and the adrenaline. He knew he had enough evidence to expose them, but with the tripwire triggered, staying longer was suicide. He gestured to Rex, signaling retreat. They backed away through the snow, careful but not careful enough. The faint snap of a branch broke the stillness. Clyde turned his flashlight toward the sound, shouting, "Over there!" Bullets cracked through the night. Bark splintered near Mike's head. He threw himself flat, pulling Rex down with him. For a heartbeat, all he could hear was his own breath and the hammering of his pulse. Then, taking the narrow gap between two trees, he crawled backward into the darkness, vanishing down the ridge. By the time they reached the frozen creek, the voices had faded. Mike stopped, chest heaving. He checked the small camera. The red light still blinked. The recording was safe. He looked at Rex, who stood panting beside him, snow clinging to his fur. "You did good, buddy," he murmured. "We've got what we came for." But even as he said it, a part of him knew this was only the beginning. Peter Collins had died for less, and now Clyde Mason knew someone was watching. The forest exploded with motion and light. Flashlights cut through the snow-laden trees, beams darting like predators searching for prey. Mike Harris ran low and fast, his boots sinking deep into the drifts, heart pounding hard against his ribs. Behind him came the shouting, angry, panicked men crashing through the woods. A gunshot cracked, the echo rolling through the valley. Snow fell from the branches above, glimmering briefly in the moonlight before vanishing into darkness. Rex kept pace at his side, muscles rippling beneath his sable fur, breathing steady but intense. The dog was born for this. Speed, silence, loyalty forged in the fire of shared combat. Mike veered left, sliding down a shallow incline toward the creek. His shoulder brushed a low branch, scattering snow across his face. He didn't stop. He couldn't. The sound of boots drew closer. Two of Clyde's men were faster than the rest, younger, determined. Mike risked a glance back. The first was tall and wiry, his coat flapping open to reveal a hunting rifle slung across his chest. The second was broader, carrying a flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other. Their faces were shadowed, but their intent was clear. Mike ducked behind a spruce tree, forcing his breath quiet. Years of Marine training came back like muscle memory, the rhythm of stealth, the calm before violence. He signaled Rex with 2 fingers. The dog slunk away into the dark, circling wide. The men moved closer. "He went this way," the taller one hissed. Mike waited until he could hear the crunch of snow just behind the tree, then stepped out. His movement was sudden and precise. One hand deflected the rifle barrel aside. The other slammed into the man's throat. The attacker gasped, dropping to his knees. Before the second man could react, Rex lunged from the side, jaws locking onto his forearm. The crowbar clattered to the ground as the man screamed, trying to shake the dog off. Mike swung his elbow into the man's temple, sending him sprawling. He yanked Rex back by the harness, whispering, "Good boy." The dog released, teeth gleaming with frost and sweat. But then another voice cut through the forest, a deeper, older one, rough with anger. "Harris!" Clyde Mason stepped out from behind a tree 30 yards away, flashlight in one hand, revolver in the other. His heavy coat flapped open, revealing a shoulder holster and a plaid shirt dark with sweat. Snow clung to his beard, and his eyes burned with fury. "You should have stayed out of this," he shouted. Mike dove behind a fallen trunk as the first shot rang out. Bark exploded beside his head. He rolled to one side, drew his sidearm, and fired twice in return, both shots wide. His aim faltered from the cold and the pounding adrenaline. Clyde advanced, boots crunching steadily. "You think you can stop this?" he growled. "You're one man." Mike gritted his teeth, pressed his shoulder against the frozen ground, and waited. When Clyde came close enough, he threw a small rock to the right, drawing his attention. As the flashlight beam swung that way, Mike surged from cover and fired again. The shot grazed Clyde's coat, missing by inches. Clyde cursed, raised his revolver, and fired once more. This time the bullet struck true. Mike felt the impact like a hammer to his chest, spinning him backward. Pain ripped through his left shoulder, hot and deep. He fell into the snow, gasping. Rex barked, furious, standing between him and Clyde, teeth bared. Clyde hesitated just long enough for Mike to drag himself behind another tree. He pressed a gloved hand against the wound. Blood seeped through his fingers, bright against the white snow. His vision blurred. He knew he couldn't outfight them now. Rex growled low, ready to attack, but Mike shook his head weakly. "No, not now." His breath came in shallow bursts. "Listen, boy. You know what to do." Rex's ears twitched. He leaned closer, pressing his head against Mike's chest. Mike looked into those intelligent amber eyes, whispering between clenched teeth. "Find Dan. Dan Brooks." The name stirred old memories. Dan had been his squad mate back in Afghanistan. Sharp-eyed, loyal, the kind of man who always found humor even in the worst moments. After the war, Dan had moved to the nearby town of Hamilton, working as a mechanic. He was the only one who understood Rex's signals. They'd trained together years ago during canine exercises. Mike stroked Rex's head once, his hand trembling. "He'll know. Go, boy. Go." The dog hesitated, torn between instinct and command. Then, with one last look, Rex turned and sprinted into the night, disappearing into the trees. Clyde shouted somewhere behind the clearing. "Fan out! He's hit! He can't have gone far!" Mike forced himself upright, pain flaring through his shoulder. He stumbled down the slope toward the creek, using the darkness for cover. His blood left a faint trail across the snow, vanishing under new flakes that began to fall harder. He could hear the men moving in the opposite direction now, following Rex's trail instead. It bought him time, but not much. He found a cluster of thorny bushes near the frozen stream and crawled beneath them, panting. The cold bit deep into his bones. He tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve and bound his wound as tightly as he could. Every movement was agony, but he didn't stop until the bleeding slowed. For a long time he lay there listening, the wind in the trees, the fading voices of his pursuers, and the steady heartbeat of survival pulsing through his ears. Somewhere out there, Rex was running for help, and for the first time since the chase began, Mike let himself close his eyes for a moment, whispering, "Just hold on, Harris. You've done worse than this." Above him, snow drifted down quietly, covering his tracks, as the forest swallowed the last echoes of gunfire. The small town of Hamilton slept under a pale winter moon, its streets empty except for the slow drift of snow that turned every lamplight into a halo. Somewhere on the edge of town, behind an old auto repair shop marked Brooks & Sons, a German shepherd tore through the snow with the force of instinct. Rex's paws struck the ground in rhythm, each exhale bursting in small clouds as he sprinted toward the one person his master had named, Dan Brooks. Inside the dim-lit garage, Dan was bent over a truck engine, his hands black with grease, the radio playing faint country music. At 40, Dan carried the same sturdy presence he'd had during his Marine days. Broad shoulders, cropped brown hair showing early streaks of gray, a trimmed beard hiding a faint scar that ran along his jaw. His blue eyes, sharp and weathered, spoke of a man who'd seen too much, but learned to live with the silence that followed. Since leaving the service, he'd settled into the rhythm of small-town life, fixing engines by day, drinking cheap whiskey by night, and keeping the past locked behind a quiet stare. When Rex burst through the open garage door, Dan froze. The dog's arrival was a shock. Rex was supposed to be with Mike, miles away in the forest. The shepherd's fur was dusted with snow and his collar slightly torn. He ran straight to Dan, whining, then barked twice in short, deliberate bursts before grabbing the man's sleeve with his teeth and tugging hard toward the door. Dan's gut clenched. Something's wrong. He crouched down, resting a rough hand on Rex's neck. "Where's Mike?" The dog barked once, then ran to the corner where Mike's old ranger jacket hung, pawing at it urgently. That was enough. Dan threw on a heavy olive parka, the same military-issued one he'd kept since Afghanistan, then grabbed a headlamp, medical kit, and his hunting knife. The cold hit him full in the face as he climbed into his truck, an old green Ford that roared to life after a few turns of the key. Rex jumped into the passenger seat, pacing restlessly, eyes locked on the dark road ahead. "All right, boy," Dan muttered, tightening his grip on the wheel. "Show me." They tore through the back roads, the headlights carving tunnels through the snow. Rex stood with his front paws on the dashboard, occasionally barking to guide direction. 2 barks meant left, 1 meant straight. Dan didn't question it. Back in the Corps, he'd trained side by side with canine units. He knew how they thought, how they communicated beyond words. The forest loomed ahead, black and silent except for the whisper of wind. When Dan stopped the truck near the edge of the Bitterroot line, Rex leapt out immediately, circling, then darting toward the trail that led deeper in. Dan followed, flashlight cutting through the dense trees. They moved fast but quiet, both aware that noise could mean death. After half an hour of trekking, the faint sound of engines reached them. Dan crouched behind a snow-covered log and peered through the branches. Down in the hollow below, several figures moved among tarped stacks of lumber. Clyde Mason's men, armed and tense, sweeping flashlights across the snow. A dark pickup truck idled nearby, its exhaust smoke rising like a ghost. "Damn it," Dan whispered. He scanned the area, formulating a plan. Direct confrontation was suicide. There were too many of them. He needed to pull them away from wherever Mike was hiding. He turned to Rex. "We make noise, we draw them off, then you take me to him. Got it?" Rex gave a short, affirmative bark. Dan slipped back to the truck parked uphill and climbed inside. He flipped the headlights to full beam and slammed the horn. The blaring echo shattered the forest's quiet, bouncing off every ridge and trunk. Almost immediately, shouts erupted below. "They're up there!" one voice yelled. Dan grinned grimly and threw open the door, lighting a flare. The red glow painted the snow in crimson streaks. He hurled it into the ravine opposite the lumberyard, creating the illusion of movement. Several of Clyde's men rushed toward the light, guns drawn, chasing the wrong ghost. "Come on, boy," Dan said, grabbing his bag. They slipped into the darkness on the opposite side, moving fast through the cover of trees. Rex led, occasionally glancing back to ensure Dan followed. Minutes later, Rex stopped suddenly and began pawing at a thick cluster of bushes near a frozen creek. Dan dropped to his knees and parted the branches. There, half buried in snow, was Mike Harris. His face was pale, his lips tinged blue, and his left arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage soaked through with blood. "Jesus, Mike." Dan's voice broke. He set the flashlight down and checked for a pulse. It was weak but steady. "You stubborn bastard." Mike's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. "Rex? Made it?" His voice was a rasp. "Yeah, he did. Smart dog you've got." Dan ripped open the medical kit, disinfected the wound, and pressed a new bandage against the shoulder. Mike gritted his teeth but didn't make a sound. Once the bleeding slowed, Dan helped him to his feet. "We're getting you out of here. Can you walk?" "Not far," Mike muttered, swaying. "Then I'll carry you if I have to." They moved slowly through the woods, taking an old maintenance path Dan remembered from years ago. The sounds of the lumber gang faded behind them. The diversion had worked. By the time they reached the dirt road where Dan's truck waited, dawn was breaking, a faint pink glow spilling across the horizon. Rex hopped into the bed of the truck as Dan eased Mike onto the seat. "Hang in there," he said, starting the engine. "You're not dying out here. Not after all that." Mike smiled faintly, exhaustion heavy in his voice. "Still giving orders like you used to." Dan smirked, shifting into gear. "Some habits never die, brother." The truck rolled forward, wheels crunching over ice, carrying them away from the forest that had nearly taken both their lives. The cabin was dim and quiet, except for the faint whistle of wind slipping through the cracks in the old wood. The stove's fire had burned down to glowing embers, painting the room in a dull orange glow. Mike Harris lay on the couch, his face pale, eyes half-lidded, sweat clinging to his temples. His left shoulder was crudely bandaged, the bullet long gone but the pain pulsing deep beneath the skin. Beside him, Rex rested his head on the floorboards, amber eyes fixed on his master, body tense as if guarding him from invisible threats. Dan Brooks sat nearby, hands stained with dried blood that wasn't his own. He had spent most of the night patching Mike up and making sure he didn't bleed out. Now, under the wavering light of dawn filtering through the frosted windows, Dan watched his old friend stir back to consciousness. "Easy," he said quietly when Mike tried to move. "You lost a lot of blood." Mike groaned, swallowing hard. His throat felt dry like sandpaper. "Did we make it?" "Yeah," Dan nodded. "We made it. But we can't stay long. They'll come looking once they realize we're gone." Mike reached into his vest pocket with trembling fingers, pulling out a small waterproof pouch. Inside was a memory card, a voice recorder, and a folded slip of paper with GPS coordinates written in hurried scrawl. His voice was low but steady. This is everything. The camera footage, the audio, the site location. It's enough to bury Clyde and his crew. Dan took the pouch carefully, his expression hardening. "I'll take it to the sheriff myself." Mike met his gaze. "Make sure it goes to someone we can trust." The sheriff of Ravalli County, Sheriff Tom Ridley, wasn't a man easily swayed. In his early 50s, tall with a stocky build and a clean-shaven jaw that made his square face seem carved from granite, Ridley had a reputation for being fair but firm. His dark hair was flecked with gray, and deep lines creased the corners of his eyes, a man shaped by years of dealing with people who thought they could outsmart the law. He'd served as a state trooper before taking the badge in Bitterroot, where everyone knew his name and few dared to cross him. By mid-morning, Dan drove into the sheriff's office, snow still clinging to his parka and beard. The office was small but warm, a kettle whistling softly on the old stove. Behind the front desk sat Deputy Laura Kent, a young woman in her late 20s with chestnut hair tucked under her cap and a quiet determination in her hazel eyes. She had only been on the job for 2 years, still carrying that mix of idealism and grit that made her a good cop. Dan slammed the pouch on the desk. "You need to get this to Sheriff Ridley. It's evidence, big one. Illegal logging, maybe murder." Laura straightened, startled by the urgency in his tone. "Who are you?" "Dan Brooks. Mike Harris sent me. He's hurt, real bad. But he's got proof." She hesitated only a second before grabbing the pouch and calling out, "Sheriff, you need to see this." Ridley emerged from his office, his posture calm but alert. He looked Dan over once, taking in the military parka, the hard stare, and the exhaustion etched in his face. "Come inside," he said. Within minutes, the sheriff had the files uploaded on his computer. The room went silent except for the sound of the audio playback, the voices of Clyde Mason and his men, the confession about Peter Collins, the plans for moving stolen timber. Ridley's jaw tightened as the truth unfolded. When the last recording ended, he turned to Dan. "Where's Harris now?" "At his cabin, wounded. He won't make it far if they find him." Ridley nodded once. "We'll take it from here. You did the right thing." He motioned to Laura. "Get a warrant ready and call the State Forestry Task Force. We're moving tonight." That evening, as snow thickened over the Bitterroot, the quiet of the forest shattered under flashing lights and the roar of engines. Law enforcement vehicles cut through the trees, their beams converging on the same lumber yard Mike had risked everything to expose. Officers in winter gear moved swiftly through the clearing, shouting commands. Several men surrendered immediately, while others tried to flee but were caught in the surrounding perimeter. Clyde Mason was dragged from his truck, cursing and thrashing, his face red with rage. "You can't prove a damn thing!" he shouted. Ridley stepped forward, his voice steady. "We've got your voice on tape, Mason. You shot a ranger and buried him in your greed. You're done." Rachel Dunn, the logistics contractor, stood nearby, hands raised. Her defiance had melted into quiet shock, her face pale under the floodlights. "I never meant for anyone to die," she muttered as cuffs clicked around her wrists. By the time dawn broke again, the site was secured. Dozens of logs were tagged for evidence, ledgers, tools, and vehicles impounded. Justice, slow but certain, had come for the forest. Back at Mike's cabin, the wind had calmed. The fire was burning again, its warmth soft against the morning chill. Mike awoke to the sound of Rex shifting beside the couch, tail thumping gently against the wood. His shoulder ached, but he could breathe easier now. On the small table next to him lay Dan's phone. A new message blinked on the screen. "They've got Clyde. Warrants signed. Peter's case is reopened. You did it, brother." Mike leaned back, exhaling deeply. Rex lifted his head, and Mike reached over to scratch between his ears. "We did it, partner," he whispered. Outside, the forest stretched silent and endless, snow glittering beneath the first light of dawn, a place scarred, but healing. Sometimes, miracles don't come with thunder or light. They come quietly, in the form of a loyal dog who refuses to give up, a friend who shows up when you need him most, or a flicker of courage that pushes a wounded soul to keep fighting. In the frozen silence of the Bitterroot Forest, Mike learned that faith is not about never falling. It's about standing again, even when you bleed. Perhaps God didn't stop the storm that night, but he sent help through the snow, through Rex's loyalty, through Dan's friendship, through the strength that still burns inside every heart that refuses to quit. And maybe that's how God works. Not by changing the world for us, but by changing us for the world. As you finish this story, take a moment to think of your own Rex, that loyal companion, that quiet friend, that unexpected miracle God placed in your path. Because faith often hides in the ordinary. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope still walks among us. Leave your thoughts below. How has faith or friendship guided you through your own dark forest? Subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next story where light overcomes the storm. May God bless you, your family, and every soul who still believes that miracles are real, even in the quiet snow.